Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependency podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. That is for being codependent. Now in your 20s, you're exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in crap relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Oh, hello. Fancy seeing you here. I am so excited for you guys to hear Nick's interview, and just wanted to drop in here, give you a heads up. About halfway through, the audio starts to skip a little bit. There's an unfinished sentence here or there, a random pause. I did my best to edit it out and appreciate your understanding. Okay, girl, one day when I have a boss-ass system, all of this will be but a memory. But for now, I appreciate your patience. Thank you. And now, without further ado, here's this week's episode. So today we have Nick Bognar. He is a psychotherapist in Pasadena, California. His specialties are men's issues and codependency. Nick's favorite thing is to help people learn how to say the word no without breaking a sweat. Nick, thank you for coming on.
Marissa, thank you so much for inviting me on.
I love that. Nick's favorite thing is to help people learn to say no without breaking a sweat. I mean, that must take years.
Sometimes everyone, just like in non-clinical life, everyone is on a different time schedule. And so, yeah, some people take years of working up to that no, and some people do it really fast. But no matter what their time schedule is, there's just kind of nothing better than watching somebody really get to set boundaries and have a quality of life enhancement that sometimes can only come from saying no.
Right. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what drove you to choose a position to help people learn to say no?
Absolutely. So I had a different career, as many of us do, prior to being a therapist. I was the COO of a business in Illinois. And the assignment was...
COO?
I know, fancy, right? That's a fancy way of saying HR, at least in my situation. But I got the title, so now I use it. Anyway, so I was in this position where on paper, everything was nice. I liked my boss. The people that worked for me were terrific. I was paid well. All the things seemed to be there, but I was really miserable. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, therapy, when I was the client, was the thing that helped me to come to understand the parts of that situation that really weren't working for me. And it gave me permission to leave it, which turned out to be a really terrific decision.
To say
Years
no.
after that, when really and truly. I mean,
no.
I'm ashamed that I didn't make that connection prior, but yeah, I mean, that was a thing that, to me, it felt like a yes, but it also was a no. It was, no, I'm not going to stay at this job. No, I'm not going to stay in this state. This isn't working for me. So I left it and then spent a couple of years kind of, flitting around trying to figure out what to do. And then my own therapist asked me if I had thought about doing this. And that had seemed, I wouldn't have even considered it to be a possibility for me. But I checked it out, and it turns out that you can go to therapy school. It's not actually maybe even particularly very hard to get into. And I really loved it. I loved every minute of it. And it has been a thing where I get to help other people do the same sort of journey and transition that I did. And that for me was life-changing. It was the most important thing I've ever done.
Right. So your therapist recommended you become a therapist.
Isn't that something?
What was that like to be asked that by someone who was helping you so much?
I laughed at her. That's the God's honest truth. That was in couples counseling with my wife, and I laughed at her and said, no. She was like, did you ever think about doing this? No. Laughed. And my wife said, oh, well, I think you should. And I was like, probably not very gracious about that either. And we let it sit, and we let it sit for 6 months. And then I was griping again about the job I was doing at the time that I didn't like, my other career that I didn't like. And the therapist brought it up again. And my wife said, why don't you just go look at one? And a week later, I attended an open house at Phillips Graduate Institute in sunny Chatsworth, California. And I didn't even need to visit another school. It was like, oh, this is where I need to be, right here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, unhappy in a career that you could have done for your life. You said no to that. You said no to being a therapist for the first time. And then eventually learning from your experience sensed, I can help people do the same thing.
I knew I wanted to help people. It was a little while before I really thought I was going to be able to do it, but I knew I could study it. And so I was really happy to be a part of it.
Right.
What about you? I don't know you're starting to be a therapist story.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bottomed out emotionally at 20, and I was calling my family every day. I was just a sad, sobby girl. And my dad was like, maybe you should talk to someone. And I said, but I have you. And
yeah.
But it was not, I was on this downhill road, and there was just no plateau or uphill in sight. Mm-hmm. I just had a lot of downward momentum. And yeah, went to therapy, not necessarily thinking I would do it. I went for a year, transformational, took some psychology classes, and then I was on my way. But
yes.
What led you to specialize in codependency?
Well, I kind of, maybe I'm being a little glib here, but I think most credible therapists have at least a lot of codependency in them. I think it's a place where a lot of therapists start from. You gain these patterns as a young person of caring for other people and really minding and looking out for other people's responses before your own.
Right.
And the upside to that is that it makes you really vigilant and really attuned to people. You often know what people are thinking or feeling or saying or doing before other people do, and that's a wonderful advantage unless it's the only thing that you're paying attention to and not paying any attention to yourself. So just like I learned how to say no, and just like I learned how to finally do some things for myself and have healthier boundaries in relationships, it makes me feel good to help other people go on that journey, because I know firsthand how fulfilling it is for me. There are things that I can help people with that I haven't really experienced firsthand, and that's always nice. But this one, I know how painful it is to be stuck in that loop, and I know how freeing it is to be ejected from it, or to eject yourself from it.
Right. I love this. So how fulfilling it is to help others learn to say no, and also your empathy with how painful, agonizing, destructive it is to be so keen and perceptive of others' feelings, wants, and needs where you don't even exist sometimes.
Right. And before we really realize a lot of times how that's hurting us, it can feel like a superpower. And it kind of is. We frame all of our greatest deficits as our strengths, right? And so I still don't think it's necessarily a bad habit, but like Cyclops the X-Men with his vision that sears things, you have to know when to put the ruby glasses on and when to really let that thing fire. Does that make sense?
I love that. I have never, right? I know there are benefits to codependency. I know I have benefited from being codependent on more positive, supportive, encouraging people as opposed to homeless, alcoholic boyfriends, which we'll talk about in a dating episode. And yet...
Okay. You're going to talk about that in an episode I'm not in. Okay, that's fine.
And yet a superpower, right? But really having this sixth sense of what others are needing can be extremely helpful, advantageous, beneficial. Superpower.
I waited tables for years, including all the way through grad school. And it was a really interesting way to see sort of a microcosm of codependency flare up, because I was really, really good at it, fast, think on my feet, but I also can look at a whole room of people and know what all of them want. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can absolutely see and triage and prioritize which person needs which thing, which person's about to ask for which thing. But the problem is that, you know, when codependents take care of all these other people and then find themselves neglected, they build this tremendous resentment and anger. And those who knew me in that time will tell you how unpleasant I was to be around and how angry I was all the time. Because in part, I was showing up for work, you know, giving all this attunement, which was frankly overboard. I mean, you know, people want you to take care of them. They want you to wait on them, but they're not asking that you like mind meld with them.
Right.
But that's what I was doing. And then feeling underpaid and feeling poorly treated, you know, again, because of this deal in my mind that I'd have that I'd take care of all their needs and they'd take care of all my needs, you know, which is just so super codependent. And so on the one hand, it made me phenomenal at that job. Like, those same people who will tell you how unpleasant I was to be around will say, like, yeah, he was fast, he took care of everything. But I was angry and resentful all the time. And so part of it is learning how to dull that superpower a little bit so that you're not overdoing it. And then also learning how to take care of yourself at the same time.
Yes. And Nick, I hear us talking about how codependency can manifest at work, in relationships, with anybody and everybody, if it's our superpower.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define codependency?
I define it as taking care of other people until it kills you. Because it's dire.
How so?
Because ultimately, I mean, both in real life and as a clinician, I see the ways that people neglect themselves and the ways that people's, you know, that has an effect on the self-esteem. If I constantly act as though I'm not worth taking care of, then really that's my self-estimation as a person that doesn't deserve to be taken care of. Sometimes it results in real serious neglect, like I really actually don't meet my needs. I don't, you know, eat or take care of myself. You know, it can manifest in, you know, ways where we have partners that abuse us openly. There's just so many ways. And sometimes it's not even that dire, and that can be more insidious, where like you just kind of feel lousy all the time. But whatever it is, the effects are widespread and self-perpetuating. And so I see it as a pretty dire thing.
Right. And long-term can cause death. Short-term, be a member of the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Right? Miserable, existing, suffering.
Yeah. Well, it's not very connected, right? If you know, my partner and I have a relationship and it's all about my partner and not about me at all, then is my partner really even getting to be in relationship with me? Like, are we married? Do we know each other? Do we love one another? Or are we in a kind of a service relationship?
Right.
And people normalize that for a variety of reasons, you know, and so sometimes it's just shining the light and saying like, hey, hold up. Is that working for you? And then a lot of times you hear no, and then sometimes you hear yes, and then you say, well, okay, so if so, how are you so miserable?
Right.
You know, it's a lot of having somebody who is really caring, the therapeutic process anyway, is a lot of having somebody who is caring and vigilant and dispassionate to sort of mirror what's going on in your life.
Right. Caring, compassionate, mirror. And I love working with codependents, right? They come in.
What do you love about it?
You know, reflecting that caring and compassionate mirror. And if and when I tell other therapists that I specialize in treating codependency, I'm usually met with, ugh.
Really?
Those codependents, they drive me nuts.
Who is talking this nonsense? Name names. But
and they will describe their difficulties with codependence. They will suggest how tedious and agonizing and frustrating the work is with them. That is not my experience. It doesn't sound like yours.
No.
And yet, I do find, at least in the young men and women who I work with who do come, and there's, at this fork in the road, choosing between their boss and someone else, and someone's going to be disappointed and they're terrified. Others around them will state the obvious, right? We'll quit.
Yeah.
Or, call that person.
Right. It works great, doesn't it? You don't even need a therapist.
Yeah, just decide. Just make a decision.
Right.
And how come you sense the compassionate and caring patient mirror is needed with codependency, with actually healing?
Well, because I recognize, one of the main values that I carry into therapy is that everything makes sense, and people do stuff for a reason, and it's a good reason. Unless somebody's really fully delusional, like they're doing something for a good reason. So if somebody has a choice that to me seems obvious, but to them is a real dilemma, then I want to honor that makes sense that that is a dilemma for them. They may gain clarity on it. We may work together on that, but I don't want to say like, of course you quit that fucking job. Of course you quit that fucking job. Unless I sense that the client just needs permission, in which case I don't call it permission. But if I feel like a client wants to make that decision and just needs somebody to mirror that that's okay, I mirror that that's okay. But if somebody's saying, I don't know whether, I'm just making it up. I don't know whether to displease my boss or my partner here, then I assume that those are both really good and really bad choices. And I want to hear all about the pros and cons, and I want to accept that this will be a painful decision for them either way. They have to make a decision, but I also understand that even though their friends think it is an obvious one, that I care that it will hurt them to make this decision, but I also want to honor their strength in making it.
Right. So, welcoming, inviting, understanding, caring, compassionate patience is needed. Because for this individual, right, it makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's taking you so long. Let's try and understand why it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And then decide, coming to mind, I remember in graduate school, I was in my last semester, and I was a good student. And I was going codependent. And just impressing all my professors. I had a part-time job. Mm-hmm. I was a full-time student. And I was going to finish, potentially, my thesis. All the fall semester, so I wouldn't have to take the spring. You should have seen the tears and agony between this part-time job or continuing full-time and finishing my thesis. I was so terrified of disappointing my boss and inconveniencing her and being a typical student. Other students left and right. We would work for a little bit and then we'd leave. We're freaking 25-year-old kids. We're not reliable employees. But I was like, oh my gosh, they need me. They're gonna really, and it made sense for me at the time, even though it was obvious what to do. And I had to talk and cry and walk through it. And eventually I did quit. But struggle is real.
Hard. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense that it was hard because it meant something to you to prove It sounds like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like it meant something to you about who you were, that you would stick with that job and that you would work super hard and you wouldn't abandon that person. You know, that's existential. That fucking matters. It doesn't matter if it matters to somebody who doesn't know you, but to you, it deeply matters. And so I definitely want to honor that with people.
Right. It was the disappointment. I was like, must not disappoint.
Yeah.
Slogan.
Which is, you know, and again, it's so funny because I, you know, having been a person who employs people, something that I say to people is like, anybody who really employs people for a living and isn't dysfunctional knows that people leave. Like, it's a normal part of the life cycle. Just as we're born and we, you know, mature and then we die, like, it is that way in jobs. Very, very few jobs do you just work from the day you turn 18 until you retire, right? And so competent HR professionals understand that it is not personal and that comings and goings are a reasonable part of the life cycle. And therapists realize this too. Sometimes we say goodbye to our clients. I always hope clients will do a termination session because I think that's a good way to put a cap on the work. But it's not a bad thing that people leave. It's a normal thing that people leave. You know, and so we just need to normalize that. And, you know, but enough people take it personally. You will have that one boss that's just like, I can't fucking believe you're doing this to me. Like, how do you live with yourself leaving me with a Saturday night shift, you know, in November? And it's like, well, you know what, maybe you just need to get accustomed to being the manager of a restaurant and understand that staffing is, this is how staffing works. You know, when I employed people, I would, you know, sometimes people would come very, very afraid and just be like I had a person one time who told their department that they were planning to leave but didn't tell me because they were worried I was going to retaliate. And it got to me and I called them in and said, hey, listen, I'm totally okay with this. Like, I want you to succeed, even if it's not with us. I'm going to push you forward as well as best I can. I'm going to ask, and I think you're going to say yes, that you leave the place clean and that you set something up so that whoever we find to replace you has a really good start and can do the job really easily. But I'm not going to retaliate on you. Even if we're not getting much done in the last couple of weeks, I want to set you up to succeed because that's important.
Right.
You know, a lot of bosses aren't like that, but that's their problem, not your problem.
It's not, right? And that is an aspect of codependency. My problem, your problem is my problem. And right. I don't want to be your problem. And also, I sense, at least in my own experience and the young men and women I work with and the listeners, being codependent, we do somehow find those bosses, those neurotic bosses who just really, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
we're just a perfect pair. Just totally like, oh, you're my problem is your problem. Yes. Your problem is my problem. We'll live happily ever after together. And so being able, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, just being able to work through that, and I sense part of the healing journey for codependence is to be able to sniff and smell out those individuals so we don't continue to create those patterns.
Yeah.
Over and over.
And also to limit our own behaviors so that we're not inviting those behaviors in. But in speaking to our theme of things make sense, right? The beginning of that relationship feels really good. Mm-hmm. When you're codependent and you start with that boss that needs or demands all of this extra stuff, and you're the person that can show up with it, that feels so good. The beginning of that relationship is so, you know, I mean, it's kind of romantic in a way. And I think this is how romantic relationships flourish under codependency too, is that you find that person that just needs and demands. And you can be the perfect person that holds up that person and makes sure that everything that they want works. And that feels really good. It's really sexy. It's really romantic. But in both of those relationships, the work and the romantic one, eventually, after a while, the newness and the excitement of being someone's everything wears off because maybe you're exhausted or maybe they have 3 people that are their everything. And then suddenly you build this resentment and anger and trappedness. But this is the piece where the rubber hits the road. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people recognize that, and the thing that they need to be reminded of is that it is actually their thing that they need to work out if they want to be free. You are the person with agency. You are the person with the choice. I know you feel like you're being forced into this situation, but you are not. You have a choice. Even if your choice is two shitty things, you have a choice. So we need to find something that gives you your agency and is the best of whatever your available options are.
Right.
Damn
That
right.
is where the rubber meets the fucking road.
Right.
So, I mean, what is so hard? What is so hard about that? What is so hard about setting boundaries?
Because Marissa, I'm the guy with no boundaries. Isn't that great? Like, aren't I the greatest? I'm the guy that lets you be, emotionally intimate with him the first time he meets you. I'm the guy that you can ask for anything and I have it. This is who I am. This is how I have created myself and how I want people to know me. So if you say to me, Nick, you can't do that anymore, you really need to set boundaries with people. It's not healthy for you to take your boss's phone call at 2 a.m. Then who am I? I mean, that's an abandonment of myself as I have created him and as I want the world to see him. And that's a real loss. And it inspires grief, sadness, reluctance, because again, you're creating an entire different self and you're saying goodbye to the self that really mattered to you.
Mm-hmm. And how do you walk people through that or prep them?
It's slow and it requires a lot of runway, and people really have to, decide that they're ready for it. So I honor and validate their fears about it. And I also really emphasize the choice that they have. And I help them find options for who they want to be instead of the person that pleases everybody. And lastly, this is important, and this is not just for codependency, this is for all manner of clinical issues. People are often really afraid to lose their problem. People are afraid not to be codependent for the reasons that we've listed. People are, sometimes if you work with artists, anybody who's worked with artists will tell you that getting rid of the depression and or anxiety is terrifying to them, because a lot of times that's where their art comes from. And the thing I tell people is that the status quo will always be there if you want to return to it. Always. Mm-hmm. There's no part of this that needs to be forever. If you do this thing and you set a boundary and you hate it, you can go right back to this life you're leading right now. If we work on your depression and you manage it and you learn to deal with it where that's not really a part of your life, and you find that your artistic life suffers, you can stop managing it and your depression can flower again and you can be exactly in the same place that you're in. And I say that without any kind of condescension or irony. Like, you really can go back to this. It's really pretty risk-free to try leading a life with boundaries and with consideration of yourself.
Right, you can always go back.
Yep.
I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say, we will gladly refund your misery.
I hadn't heard that one before. That's awesome.
So it's like, come, try. If you are miserable, sober, we will gladly refund your misery.
Yeah, you can have it back today if you want to. It's really okay. We all have choices.
Mm-hmm. So, Client comes in. They've decided. They've chosen to work on it.
Okay.
And they are working on setting boundaries.
Okay.
Maybe they leave with their chest puffed up and they're ready to go face or do something. And they stumble. They backtrack. They come back and they're like, Nick, I wasn't able to quit my job. Right?
That wasn't your fucking homework anyway. I didn't tell you to quit your job.
Well, what are some simple rules you have for navigating these difficult conversations when it comes time to set boundaries?
So I have 3 rules for having boundary conversations with people.
3 rules.
I don't know if I've told you about this. Don't attack, don't defend, tell the truth, right? So attacking is when we keep other people on their heels, right? I need to have the power in this conversation in order for me to make my piece heard. And so that means I take power away from you. And that's when I walk in and say, Marissa, before I even start here, I just want you not to, you always do that. And I want you to know that it really bothers me. Right. Or, finding little faults in people. And again, the reason that is because you hear that and you get back on, and then I can sort of take over. Right. Defending is when I need you to believe something that I believe, when I can't go on without you agreeing with something that I believe. So if you say, Nick, it really seems, it really seems like you're drinking a lot. And I say, well, yeah, but I'm really not drinking that much, right? Like the standard number of drinks for a guy is this much. And as much as I'm looking at it, like this can't really hurt me. And also a lot of people drink this much. So frankly, you're kind of drinking a lot. And I'm suddenly putting stuff back at you because I can't tolerate the idea that you think I drink too much. Boundaries, maybe I don't agree with you. Maybe I think I drink enough and you think I drink too much, and I can survive both of those things. So when I'm trying to overwhelm you, that's when I'm defending, right? And then the last one is telling the truth, right? And sometimes we don't tell the truth because we lie, and not even necessarily in a mean-spirited or malicious way, but I feel like we can tell the truth to people. So sometimes we lie, no, that's fine, that's okay. Or we might just commit a lie of omission, which is just really and truly leaving out a really important piece. And so part of what I coach people through is how to tell their version of the truth, how to be heard, and how to be truthful in a situation while not attacking the other person and not needing the other person to come away believing what they believe. So 3 rules: don't attack, don't defend, tell the truth.
And how do we codependent dummies respond when we are attacked, met with defense, no, someone's lying?
So, well, I mean, it depends, but in a broad sense, I mean, a huge part of the reason, maybe the only reason why we do what we do is because we need people to love us and we need to feel worthy of love. So if somebody attacks that, we're probably going to be pretty defensive, right? If somebody has a criticism for me, I'm probably going to go really off the deep end with it, right? I mean, I think you've seen, criticism penetrates codependent people, right? If somebody is defensive and needs us to, and really puts up a big front to make us believe, I mean, I think codependents are really vulnerable to that kind of bullying behavior, right? We will sometimes take on somebody else's viewpoint in order to preserve the harmony. But oftentimes those are really important moments in therapy, because then the person might rehash that conversation with us and we say like, yeah, do you agree with that? That doesn't sound right to me. And then the person has permission to say, oh yeah, actually I don't. And then, be lied to. So it's probably pretty alienating, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really the task of the codependent person to follow those rules. And that's the thing, is when you're really working on your codependency, tell me if you agree with this. I mean, the big thing is that it always has to come back to me. It can't be about the other person. Other people are going to do whatever the fuck they're going to do. My work on my codependency is about my work on me and what I do.
100%. So don't attack.
Straight up.
Don't attack, don't defend, tell the truth.
Keep it real.
Keep it real.
What is this?
like just focus on myself.
Yeah,
stay in my bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people, I don't know if you do this, but a lot of people do interventions around, I think it was Pia Melody's first that was, imagine that you have a plastic bubble around you. That is your actual boundaries, like envision your boundaries.
I sense culturally, when I say codependent, we think female, woman.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
We got Melody Beattie, we got Pia Melody, and I mean, how have you witnessed, and can you educate us on codependency in men?
Yeah. Oh, yes, I can. Well, and to speak to your first thing, I mean, we do a really good job pathologizing women and their psychology, don't we? Like, isn't that just a fundamentally gross thing that we've done? And I can remember being a part of that, in my previous career. I can remember having experiences with who were emotional or maybe cried at the office. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, what are you doing? Now, me at this age in 2021, I know that they were having a human experience of just crying, and that like that's just actually kind of okay. And
Right.
that there might be something wrong with somebody who thinks that you can't or shouldn't ever do that. But at the time, it felt like a gross violation of rules that were very important and rules that were based around a normalization of sort of the way that men are, right?
Right.
So you see men, codependency in men, it's often as these issues often are, it's a little quieter and it's a little more self-destructive a lot of the time in men, because we're often raised to shed our insight pretty early. Emotions are, pretty taboo past a certain infant age in boys and men. And so the result is we grow up being these sort of silent characters who might care for people all the time, break their own backs to help other people.
So, cutting off from their feelings right at a young age. Boys don't cry, man up, don't be such a P word.
Sure.
No tears. Right?
Right.
Big boys, real men don't cry.
Yep.
And so there's that aspect. So they lose insight into themselves, their motives, what's driving their behaviors. And they take on this role in their families, with their friends, at work, where they give. So it could look like they're really generous. It could look like they're very... Go ahead.
Hardworking.
So putting the needs of others above themselves, and then possibly engaging in these behaviors that men tend to, how they deal with. So anger, right? Tantrums, drinking, smoking, porn, sex.
Sure.
So if there's some type of excess, it's like,
Well, I mean, really, that's how addiction works, right? Is it's a way to soothe yourself without having to actually, work on whatever it is that's actually bothering you. Those things do feel good in the moment, and by themselves, I don't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with any of those things. It's really how they're applied in your life and the effect that they're having.
Right.
And so if you don't have any, I always tell people that any credible 12 has more than one tool in it. So my goal is never to take away something that works for you. It's to add 1 to 10 more things that do work for you. And then hopefully if those things are healthier or feel better than the thing you're using now, maybe you'll go to those more often.
Right.
Ultimately, it's helping you. It's number one, helping you work on the behaviors that are getting you into the situation in the first place. It's providing you with options that you didn't know you had. I didn't know I could leave my old job. A therapist gave me permission for that. Thank you very much, therapist. It's shining a light. Part of codependency is thinking things have to be this way.
Right.
And things don't have to be this way. They can be whatever fucking way you want. You're a grown up. As long as you're not actively hurting other people, you can kind of make any choice you want. And so it's illuminating choices. And then ultimately, like a lot of times, again, obviously addiction is complicated, but a lot of the behaviors that we have that are so painful or so deleterious, we are doing those because we're miserable. If you can eliminate a lot of the misery, then you're going to eliminate a lot of the behavior. And then for the times, inevitably, that life makes us miserable, because life is like that from time to time, then you have something hopefully that feels better. And then maybe you choose that because I'm going to choose to meditate instead of indulging in my temper, because I know that if I indulge in my temper, I'm going to have to go to apologize to people and I'm going to feel guilty about it.
Right.
I'm going to do that. I know that if I go to the casino and gamble a whole bunch of money, then I'm just going to have a lot less money. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to, go to a yoga class, call my best friend, play video games for 6 hours, take a walk. You know what I mean? I'm going to do something that's better for me than that thing.
Right. So put down the slot machine, deal with the underlying codependency. So there's less misery in your life, And then when misery
Yeah.
comes, because misery does, you have these other choices. You're letting go of the rules and expectations of your codependency, so you're not driven to the slot machine again.
And bonus, in addition to all that, if you've started to have boundaried relationships with people, if you've started to have these things, right, then another option that you have is you can get other people to care for you when you're in distress, which is something that we very rarely seek. And especially men are, again, we tell them pretty early on that if you're looking for somebody to take care of you, then you must be a big baby, which of course is horrifying, because as human beings, we all need people to care for us, and not in the really super surface ways all the time, but we need somebody to validate us. We need somebody to soothe us and calm us. So in those moments, you also, hopefully, if you're getting a hang of those boundaries with other people, you can also for, soothing or for care.
Huge bonus of overcoming codependency.
Maybe the main thing. Maybe I'm treating it like it's a bonus, and maybe that's sort of the main thing.
Right. Yeah, that true quality connection. Giving and receiving and giving. Mm-hmm. Reciprocating relationships. Yeah. Interdependence. I love it. All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much for enlightening us.
My pleasure.
Where can people find you if and when they need you?
Thank you for asking. If people want to seek me for therapy or ask me about something, you can visit me on the web at nickbognartherapy.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Nick Bognar MFT.
Thank you so much. Hey sis, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end, and know this. If you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you feel like you don't matter, know that you matter to me. Until next time, be sure to check out codependummy.com for more info about today's episode, my free course, and other resources. Take care. You're still here? Just kidding. Girl, this is not therapy, and I'm not your therapist, okay? This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the publisher, or the guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you want or need a professional, you should find one.